here today at the Inter Conference, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the Noosphere. So my dissertation at the California Institute of Integral Studies focuses on the transpersonal psychology of Stan Grof and the philosophy of Schelling, bringing them in conversation to help articulate the evolutionary emergence of the divine through the particulars, through the individuals, through us. While my work does not draw from Chardin's theories and philosophies, I have been deeply influenced by and highly resonate with his evolutionary understanding of the emergence of the divine through the cosmos, with its roots in matter moving into life, the emergence of humanity, development of consciousness, and with the Noosphere, and its destined culmination at the omega point. So for my talk today, I would like to bring the Chardin into conversation with Schelling and Grof to shed some light on what the birth of the cosmic Christ might look like, what the birth of the omega point might look like, and to give us a sense of the labor and delivery of the cosmic Christ. Pierre-Teilhard de Chardin was deeply influenced by the scientific evolutionary understandings that were flourishing during his lifetime. And in turn, these ideas have their roots in the German Romantic idealist movement of the 17th and 18th centuries, coming out of the philosophical dance and conversation between the poet, scientist Goethe and the philosophers Schelling and Hegel. So what came out of this time was an organic understanding of reality and the divine, which they called the absolute. And the legacy that we inherit from them is a conception of the divine coming into fuller and fuller self-actualization and self-realization through human history and individual lives, which we see so clearly represented in and expanded on within the Chardin's evolutionary understanding of the cosmic Christ. So where the nuances come in and where I get all excited about is the nature of the absolute. Hegel understood the divine as pure absolute consciousness, having first birthed itself out of consciousness and then moving towards self-actualization, towards fully understanding itself as everything that ever has been and everything that ever will be. Schelling, on the other hand, pushed back on this notion that it's possible for us to ground consciousness in consciousness itself. He didn't think we can ground anything in itself. He thought this was a cyclical loop that reason gets itself tangled up in. And he believed that we must ground consciousness in what came before it. And for him, what comes before consciousness is existence. And in human terms, what comes before consciousness is the intuitive experience of existence. So he dedicated the end of his career and his philosophical work to teasing out this relationship between consciousness and existence, between consciousness and experience. And he came to believe that while it is possible, he came to believe that consciousness is a secondary factor that steps onto the scene right after experience. And he thought that while it is possible for consciousness to come to understand this evolutionary journey of the divine, that consciousness itself is not the one evolving. What is evolving is existence, and it does so through experience. So, looking at this, bringing this into conversation with the Chardin's understanding of the evolution of the cosmos and the evolution of the cosmic Christ, it's not a matter of us consciously understanding that this evolution is taking place, but rather we must fully, through an act of free will, participate in the evolutionary emergence of the divine and the birth of the omega point. So how do we do that? How do we experientially participate in the birth process of the cosmic Christ? This is where we turn to the transpersonal psychology of Stanislav Grof. Stan Grof is one of the pioneers of LSD psychotherapy and the co-creator of holotropic breathwork, which he turned to once psychedelics were criminalized. He coined the term holotropic, meaning moving towards wholeness, to describe expanded states of consciousness that are beyond our ordinary day-to-day lives. States that we have access to within meditative, mystical, and psychedelic experiences. So working with LSD psychotherapy and holotropic breathwork and drawing from the experiences of his numerous patients, Grof came to identify three main experiential levels. The most superficial of these layers, from our human perspective, is the biographical layer. This layer contains experiential memories that are associated with our day-to-day lives, from from infancy all the way forward. This is the layer that Sigmund Freud identified and expanded on. The deepest experiential layer that he found is the transpersonal layer. The transpersonal layer contains experiential memories of that go far beyond the daily ordinary life. These experiences transcend time and space. They give us access to experiences of our ancestors, of past lives. They give us access to experiences that belong to various life forms, to life itself, the earth as a whole, the cosmos in its totality. And they also give us experiences of mythic content, mythic deities, and archetypal beings. And lastly, they give us access to the experience, the pure experience of the divine in its full form. This layer contains what Carl Jung identified as the collective unconscious, and it goes far beyond what Jung identified and talked about. And Grof found that moving through these experiences, fully embodying the perinatal, the birth process, and re-experiencing the actual birth of the individual, then freed the individuals from any physical or psycho-spiritual ailments that were haunting them. And he found that And he also found that when patients were able to access these perinatal content and move through them, that they didn't just have access to their own experience of their own individual births. They actually carried content in their experiences that were beyond their own and were more mythic and archetypal and were coming from the transpersonal layer. And through his more philosophical explorations of his own work, he came to identify the perinatal, or rather he came to identify this lack of fully experiencing the perinatal and fully moving through the birth content to not only be the roots of individual suffering and symptoms and ailments, but to be the roots of our collective dilemma. Rape and violence, mass incarceration, wars, and the general destructive behavior that we have towards life and the planet, which in many ways is the womb in which we are residing. So he found that gaining access to these experiences are not just mythic or are not just personal. They're not just carrying experiential memories of the individual birth, like having the umbilical cord wrapped around their neck or having their shoulders stuck in the birth canal, but that they were actually carrying these mythic and archetypal content from the transpersonal. And that accessing the individual birth actually gave his patients access to this larger process of creation, of the birth process that is taken place long before any individual births. And he also found that once individuals move through their own perinatal experiences and re-experience their own birth, then the content of the transpersonal also shifted. Before, when they would touch the divine in the transpersonal, it would be in mythic form and in archetypal form. But once they moved through the experience of the perinatal, then they were able to access the divine in a pure experiential form, free of any mythic or archetypal content. So he came to understand the perinatal to be in itself an archetypal event that separates the transpersonal from the personal, the archetype of intuition, of initiation, the archetype of individuation, of transformation, and life and death and rebirth in general. So bringing these three layers, the transpersonal, the personal or biographical, and the perinatal, into conversation with Desjardins' evolutionary understanding of the movement of the cosmic Christ, we can see that the divine self-actualizes by moving from the transpersonal into the personal through this archetypal experience of the perinatal. So the perinatal is not just the experience or the process of birthing the body into the material world. It's not just the process of birthing the individual from the transpersonal or from the collective into the personal realm, but rather it is the archetypal process of creation, rippling through time and space and manifesting itself at various levels as the divine comes into fuller and fuller self-actualization. We see it in the birth of the universe. We see it in the birth of life, in the birth of humanity, the birth of consciousness. We see it in the birth of each individual. And we saw it in the transformative journey of Jesus of Nazareth and the birth of the Christ and the Holy Spirit through and within him. It is the very experiential process of birthing the divine through the individual. It is a portal not just to the past, but into the future. And the individual birth of the divine through each and every one of us. And holotropic experiences, whether through deep spiritual work or through breath work or psychedelic experiences, gives us an experiential and participatory access to this perinatal process. The very process that we as individuals and as a collective must fully and through an act of free will participate in order not to just free our own and heal our own wounds and gain spiritual fulfillment, but to participate in the birthing of the cosmic Christ, in the labor and delivery of the cosmic Christ. An experiential birth process that once accomplished can later, through conscious self-reflection, be looked back on and be recognized as the birth of the Omega.